There are certain words that have become so widely used in our largely non-Jewish society that even though they have deep Judaic roots, they somehow just feel always a little bit out of place in a Jewish conversation. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Take the word salvation. If someone comes up to me as a rabbi and tells me that they feel saved by God, chances are the person I'm talking to just plays for a different team. Nothing wrong with it at all. We Jews just don't typically say that. Salvation is kind of the other religion's brand. But of course, in our sacred texts, and even on this very Shabbat, we read and sang and prayed to a God who we repeatedly refer to as Goel Yisrael, the Savior of Israel. El Yeshuati, God of my salvation. How about another word that isn't so common in Jewish spaces, but one that I liked so much that we named our daughter with that word? Grace. When people hear the word grace, they immediately think of that most beautiful Christian hymn, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Beautiful, just not usually thought of as ours. Shortly after our Gracie was born, I went to lunch with one of my board members from my previous job, an older Holocaust survivor. She was so excited to hear about our long-awaited baby, up until exactly the moment that I shared the name. She sort of wrinkled her nose and said, "Is grace a Jewish word?" I said, well, sure it is if you consider the 70 times the word grace, chen, appears in the Hebrew Bible. Or if you know a Hannah or a Hannah, whose name derives from the Hebrew word for grace. There are a few of those running around in our Jewish communities. So salvation, grace. The word I want to talk about this morning is witness. We don't usually talk about our Judaism as an act of witnessing. But just like salvation and grace and a host of other profound spiritual concepts, witnessing doesn't belong to any one religion. It is as much a part of our tradition as any other. This week's Torah portion contains the words that we know as the Shema, the closest thing that we have to a spiritual creed. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. People are often surprised when they realize that the Shema isn't really a prayer. Not a prayer. Because prayers are directed to God. Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, God. The Shema is a statement of witness. It's not Shema Adonai. It's not listen, God. It's Shema Yisrael. Listen up, Jews. Listen up, Israel. I have something important to tell you. Adonai is our God, our one and only. Pass it on. That's why Shema is supposed to be the first Hebrew words that we teach our children, and the last Hebrew words to cross our lips when we die. It's why countless Jewish martyrs over the centuries have gone to their ends announcing God's oneness. It's why those are the first words that we have a convert say when they emerge from the mikvah's waters. It's why we call this our most significant statement of faith. Not because it tells God something that God doesn't know, or informs God of something we need or want or wish for, or even that we're feeling grateful for. It's because it's something that we tell each other. We say the Shema, and we bear witness to who we are and what we stand for. That idea of witnessing is even encoded in the calligraphy itself in the Torah scroll. By tradition, the ayin letter at the end of the word Shema and the Dalet letter at the end of the word echad are written in extra large font. Read together, Ayin Dalet spells aid, witness. One of the most radical and bold texts in the whole rabbinic tradition addresses this question of what it means to be a witness to God. In Isaiah, the prophet who you chanted from, Aaron, this morning, the prophet writes, "You are my witnesses," declares God. 2,000 years ago, an anonymous rabbi, contributing to a collection that would later be called the Sifrei, added some words to that sentence. He said, "If you are my witnesses," declares God, "then I am God. And if you are not my witnesses, I cease to be, as it were, God." I cease to be God? God, the eternal, the one who was there before everything began, who will be there after the end of it all, God who created heaven and earth, that God ceases to be God if we cease to be God's witnesses? Simply put, yeah. God's role and relevance is dependent on us. A sovereign without a people wears a pretty lonely crown. A leader is defined by the fact that there are those who choose to follow them. This is the essential difference, or one of the essential differences between religion and philosophy. In philosophy, we can talk about whether a tree falling in the woods with no one to hear it makes a sound. But in religion, a God who calls and no one answers can hardly be called a God at all. Why do I choose to share these words this morning? Because in addition to celebrating the Sperling family, today also marks an important milestone for me, newly CBI's rabbi. Aaron, you just became my first bar mitzvah. In my previous rabbinic roles, I've had the opportunity to share in nearly every other life cycle moment. I've been under a lot of chuppahs, named a lot of babies, and stood at graveside to help mourners say goodbye. But bar and bat mitzvah is different. Unique amongst other Jewish life cycle moments, this one takes place almost exclusively in the context of a synagogue community. Why must a bar mitzvah happen within a synagogue Shabbat service? Because the celebration that we had today is fundamentally an act of bearing witness. Aaron, when you stood up and read from the Torah, chanted your Haftorah, and shared your own deeply heartfelt and hard-won personal wrestlings with our people's ancient texts, you weren't just singing some Hebrew words or delivering a speech. You were bearing witness that you are a son of this community, that you are a Jew, that our Torah lives in you, that you are one of us, a new link in a very old chain. And I see Josh Pagano sitting back there. You're up next week. One more link. A bar mitzvah is also more than just one very sweet, kind of awkward, but very sweet teenager who stands before us bearing witness to his or her own Judaism. It's also a testimony delivered in community that our 3,000-year-long story continues. Just as God needs witnesses to continue to be God, our people depends in each new generation on new folks stepping up and being counted. There is a great vulnerability in the realization that Judaism, as ancient as it is only as enduring as its claim on the very next generation. That's it. Any one generation can be the one to snap the chain. But for hundreds and hundreds of generations already, this fragile covenant has been passed forward by young people stepping up and taking their place. When I look to Aaron and to Josh and to the kids who have become B'nai Mitzvah in our community before, and the many more who will take their place in the coming months and years, I have to say that I feel a sense of great security and deep satisfaction that our future is strong. May God bless us to be good witnesses. May we bless God by being good witnesses. And may we know many joys together. Shabbat Shalom.